Chum den den gombo ja hora yo la shang za lo gang ge lu zhu zhen ni zhen zhe nie da nan da ra ze chen nie dong ge zhe 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 xie ren ni ji da ge ra lo gang da zhe bi zhou ren ma ren men dong ding re ji ze re bi zhou zhou gang la bu zhe da jie ya la zhu jie da zhu de jie zhou ni mo ni lo de ji zhang zhou zhong za jiang ma re me ze ding me ren nie ge zhe nie zhong za ra zhen do ne da zhang za jin da zhou yong da li zhou jia zhi du ge zhe da zhe ni jian zhe da men ze ren jiang ho rang yang lan de de o ma ra ba za na 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 Umara bazana do 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 zidna jijin jero wozir ji da lo de mambara se guadang dam ju zhong lo no ba lu zhu bu bie na wa jie de su yang jie zhen bo zu de ne ni mi zhang zu ne mo lu jin bo nga jia ta ge ra da na zam du zhen me do dong ba de jie zhang la chang za lo 各位佛友大家晚上好
Good evening to all Buddhist friends here this evening.
好，我们现在开始讲今天晚上的课。那么今天晚上的课的题目是人类痛苦的根源是什么？
So I'm going to begin with this evening's teaching now, and the topic for this evening's teaching is what is the origin of human suffering?
我们今天为什么要讲一个这样子的这个题目呢？就是因为我们每一个人的生活当中，就有各种各样的，让我们不快乐、不开心，这样子的这个问题，这样子的事情，那么这些事情，如果及时的不解决的话，那么不单是我们的生活不愉快而且工作、家庭都会受到一定的这个影响。
So what is the reason for talking about this topic this evening? Well, all of us in our lives encounter all manner of things that bring us unhappiness, all kinds of problems, and if we don't address them in a timely way, then not only do they make our lives unhappy, they can have a very negative impact on our work lives and on our families.
如果我们掌握了这个解决的方法，这样子的话呢，我们生活当中的很多的痛苦，其实完全是可以解决的。然后解决了以后呢，可以过一个第一个幸福快乐同时也就有意义的生活。
Once we are able to get a handle, though, on methods for solving or addressing these problems, then a lot of our suffering can be solved just like that. And once we have addressed these forms of suffering, it's then possible for us to live lives that are both happy and meaningful.
17世纪、18世纪这样子的时候呢，很多人想过如果我们拥有丰富的物质生活这样子的话，我们的所有问题都解决了，我们不会有太多的痛苦。
Back in the 17th and 18th centuries, a lot of people thought that if we were able to enjoy lives that were very materially plentiful, then we would solve all of our problems and we wouldn't need to incur suffering.
可是到了20世纪、21世纪这样子的时候呢，我们的物质生活是非常的丰富了 那么这个时候呢，很多人发现我们的很多问题仍然没有解决，我们的生活当中呢仍然有很多很多的痛苦。
However, where we are now in the 20th century, we're in a situation of having great material abundance, and yet many people have discovered that despite this, we still have lives that are full of suffering.
那么这些我们面临的一些这个痛苦，它是科技没有办法解决的，然后呢，物质也没有办法解决的，所以这个时候呢，我们很多人不清楚不明白这些问题怎么解决。
So these kinds of or forms of suffering that we face are kinds that technology is not able to solve, and material things are not able to address either. So a lot of people find themselves in a situation of really not knowing how to go about addressing these problems.
所以我们今天首先给大家介绍一下，从佛教的角度看的话，那么这些生活当中的烦恼应该怎么样解决。
So what I'd like to do tonight is to give a Buddhist's perspective on how we can go about addressing these problematic issues in our daily lives.
首先，佛教的一个最基本的这个观点一个最基本的观点是，不管我们在这个生活当中幸福、快乐或者是痛苦那么这些都是有它自己的因和缘在某种情况下就产生这个快乐、幸福那么有些时候呢会产生痛苦、不愉快、不开心那么这些都有它自己的这个因缘，它自己的因素。
So a very fundamental Buddhist concept is that all phenomena have the result of particular causes and conditions. So happiness, whether it be happiness or whether it be suffering, both of these states arise under particular causes and conditions. To some extent, they have their own causes and conditions. Sometimes happiness arises, and other times suffering does.
佛教它是一个无神论者它的很多的观点跟这个自然科学是比较接近的。
Buddhism is essentially an atheist perspective. It has many of its views or doctrines quite proximate with those found in the natural sciences.
所以他认为我们生活当中的幸福、快乐或者是痛苦都跟其他的这个像鬼神都没有太大的关系，跟我们自己有关系。
So for this reason, Buddhism doesn't regard states like happiness and suffering to rely on, say, ghosts or spirits or anything like this. It sees happiness and suffering as dependent on ourselves.
同时佛教认为，如果你想过一个幸福快乐的生活，那么你要自己去努力创造这样子的这个条件。
At the same time, Buddhism holds that if we wish to lead a happy life, then we need to go about diligently establishing the conditions that are conducive to this.
所以我们就是有了这么丰富的物质生活以后我们仍然有这么多的痛苦，那么佛教就是认为，那么我们自己的内心当中有一些问题还没有解决，所以就导致了这么多的这个痛苦和不开心。
So the Buddhist perspective would have it that despite the given that in the face of such material abundance in our lives we still have much suffering, then it must be that there are issues that we still need to address at a psychological level, and it is these issues which are resulting in our suffering.
首先我们自己的平时我们的这种普遍的这种观点比如说当我们不开心的时候或者是遇到一些挫折这样子的时候呢，我们认为这个原因就在外面，就在身外的东西就在身外的东西上，我们往往就会把这个原因就到身外，或者是我们从我们的内心以外的这个东西上面去寻找这个不开心的原因。
A very popular viewpoint, or we might say a popular way of thinking, is that when we encounter unhappiness or obstacles in our lives, that our habit is to search for reasons for our unhappiness outside ourselves, in the external world around us.
比如说我们的比如说亲人这个离开或者是我们的自己的名誉受到了这个损坏等等，就是遇到这样子的问题的时候呢，我们会认为我为什么痛苦呢？我们会说因为我的亲人离开了所以我痛苦。但是我们不会去问不会进一步的去问，那么亲人离开了为什么会痛苦我们不会进一步的去问这个问题，我们只是说就是因为我的亲人不在了，所以我不开心，所以我痛苦。
So when, for example, a relative of ours passes away, or when our reputation is harmed in some way, when we ask ourselves what the reason for the suffering is that is associated with these kind of occurrences, we usually say to ourselves, well, I'm suffering because my relative passed away. What we don't usually ask ourselves is, why is it that I experience suffering when my relative passes away?
比如说年轻人失恋或者是离婚或者是我们的父母或者其他的亲人失去的时候呢，然后大家都很伤心大家都很难过然后呢我们就从表面上看这个难过和痛苦的原因就是因为离婚了，就是因为失联了，就是因为这个亲人失去了，就这个原因表面上看是对的是这样子但是如果进一步再去思考的话，这个里面可能还有其他的原因，还有我们会发现更重要的问题呢还不是这个，可能是其他的原因。
So the same goes when we break up with a beloved or have a divorce, when perhaps our parents or other family members pass away, we feel extremely upset. We feel extremely unhappy. Well, if we're to superficially analyze our unhappiness at these moments, then it's very easily to identify our sense of inner suffering due to the simple fact of the event that has taken place, so the divorce or the breakup or the death of a relative. At a superficial level, this kind of explanation is correct. However, if we are to look at the situation more closely, we're able to find that there may in fact be a more important reason.
那么这个其他的原因是什么呢？就是 就最深处的这个原因啊，就在我们自己的内心当中啊去寻找。也就是说，这是我们自己对某一个人的这种执着在乎非常非常的这种执着。实际上，我今天要表达的是什么呢？我们的痛苦它的第一个来源，都不是这些是我们自己的执着。
If we do look for a deeper reason, then what we will find is that the reason lies deep in our inner minds, and the reason is the attachment or the care, the strong attachment that we have in our minds. So what I really want to express tonight is, first of all, that our suffering is not due to these events themselves, but rather due to our own sense of mental attachment.
比如说一个人他有2个姐姐或者是妹妹或者是兄弟，那么其中一个跟我的感情非常非常深，然后另外一个人的感情就没有那么深但是呢，他们同样是我弟弟或者妹妹是跟我有这种血缘的这个关系那么有一天其中一个离去了，失去了，这样子的话，比如说跟我这个感情很深的这个人如果失去的话，那这个对我的打击是相当相当严重，特别特别的难过另外一个感情不是很深的如果这个人离去了，同样也会伤心但是没有那么的严重，那么这2个都是同样是我的弟弟、我的妹妹或者姐姐为什么这2个人的这个这个失去给我的打击的这个程度为什么不一样呢如果我们到外面去寻找这个答案，没有寻找，没办法找到合理的答案，因为这2个都是我的亲人，离我最近的亲人所以到外面去找这个答案是找不出来的。
So if a person, let's say they had 2 sisters or 2 brothers, their relationship with one sibling was very, very close, and their relationship with the other sibling was not so close. Let's just say that one of them, the close one, was to pass away. Then that would have a very strong impact on the person. They would feel extremely upset. If the sibling with whom they were not so close passed away, however, then they might still feel upset, but it wouldn't be that serious. Now, how should we explain this? Both of the siblings are, after all, our blood relatives. Yet why is it that their loss, the extent of the impact the loss has on us, is different in both cases? If we attempt to locate the reason for this in the outside world, as it were, we're unable to do so.
然后就是因为这种执着因为这种执着太深了这样子以后呢，我们让我们强制性的放下离开，这样子的时候呢，因为我们放不下因为我们心结打不开这个时候我们的这个对我们的这个内心会有非常严重的这个创伤和打击。
It's because the attachment that we have on account of its strength, when we are forcibly compelled to let something go that we are extremely attached to, then the impact and the injury that it has on us is correspondingly large.
比如说我们的执着还有给我们很多时候带来很多的这个伤害。比如说我是一个 比如说是一个很优秀的或者是水平很高的人但是呢，如果我周边的这些人都比我高这个水平都比我高然后呢，我发现这些所有人当中我是最差的这样子的话，那么这个时候我心里就开始非常的失落然后就特别的这个痛苦其实这个时候是不需要痛苦，你自己已经是一个很不错、水平很高的人但是呢，因为其他人比我高了以后呢，然后我们就执着这个不看我们的实际情况，然后呢，因为别人都比我高了以后呢，然后因为我的执着，然后给我带来很多的不开心。
So another example of attachment would be an outstanding individual, someone who is really excellent in some kind of endeavor. When they find themselves, however, in the company of people who are better than them, then they all of a sudden become the most inferior. And at such a point, they find themselves feeling very unhappy, very bent out of shape, feeling that they're the worst, when in actual fact, they're still a very accomplished person. It's only when they're in the midst of others who are better than them that they start to fixate on this fact. And so notwithstanding the fact that they are very accomplished themselves, start to feel very unhappy.
同样的比如说我自己的水平非常非常的差，比如说我的英语的水平非常差但是如果我周边的这些人比我还差这样子的时候呢，然后我觉得就很开心觉得我很了不起
So another example would be when we are not particularly good at something. So for example, my English level is not so good. However, if I were to, or if someone with a poor English level were to be in the company of others whose English level is even worse than them, then they would feel very happy.
所以这个执着就是这个执着在我们的生活当中经常就困扰我们。
So this attachment in our everyday lives is something that really causes us a lot of vexation.
影响我们的生活，影响我们的情绪。
And really impacts on our lives and our frames of mind.
然后执着，比如说这个苹果手机刚刚出来的时候呢我对它特别的这个执着那么在我买到这个苹果手机的1周之内然后我特别的执着，如果这个1周之内这个手机不能丢不能失去失去了以后呢，然后我就很特别的会难过的。
Or an iPhone, let's just say the first week that it comes out, the first week that I get it, I care about it very much, and I couldn't bear to lose it in the very first week that I own it.
如果是2年以后买了这个手机2年以后再失去了再丢了然后我也许在乎的是里面的一些信息这手机就不怎么在乎了，不会给我带来太多的痛苦。
However, if I were to lose it after owning it for 2 years, then I really wouldn't care about it so much. I mean, I might be a bit upset about some of the information that I have stored in the phone, but I wouldn't be so concerned about the loss of it per se.
为什么呢？这个是不是因为久了？这个手机是不是因为久了不能用了？不是就是因为我不太执着它了刚开始的时候我特别的执着，所以这个时候呢，我越执着然后就没有这个东西，失去了我就越痛苦越不执着它丢了无所谓就是没有那么大的痛苦。
So is the reason that I wouldn't feel upset after losing it after 2 years due to the fact that the phone is by this stage old? No, it's not. It's due to the fact that my attachment to it at this point is considerably lessened. So at the beginning stage, when our attachment is strong, then the suffering corresponding with its loss is very great. When our attachment becomes less, however, the suffering associated with losing something becomes correspondingly less.
好，这样子以后呢，我们就明白了啊，原来我们的这个痛苦啊，我们内心当中的各种各样的痛苦，都是主要就是来自于我们自己的执着。
So we can thereby appreciate that the vast majority of our psychological suffering derives from our attachment.
这样子以后呢，我们现在佛教就是告诉我们佛教告诉我们我们的所有的这个精神上的痛苦所有的精神上的痛苦跟我们的执着有关系它的最基本的这个条件就是我们的执着。
The Buddhist teachings teach us that the fundamental condition, the most basic condition for our psychological suffering is precisely attachment.
执着和这个痛苦这两个是有非常密切的关系我们怎么执着这个东西，它就怎么会给我们带来痛苦。然后我们怎么不执着某一件事情这东西就不会给我们带来痛苦。
So there's a very close relationship between attachment and suffering. The more we feel attached to something, then the greater the suffering it can bring us. Similarly, the less we feel attached to something, the less likely it is to bring us suffering.
我们的心我们的意识我们今天讲的这个我们的心是什么？第一个，我们不是大脑第二个不是指的是心脏而是我们的意识我们今天讲的心，什么叫心呢？平时佛教里面讲的都是意识我们的意识，比如说去思考、判断、分析去分析某一件事情，去判断某一件事情的这个念头叫做意识我们今天讲的心就是这个意识。
So when we talk about our minds, what I'm referring to, Kempo is using the Chinese word 心, which can be translated as either the mind or the heart. And he just clarified that when he uses this word, he means mind. But so not the physical brain and not the physical organ of the heart, but rather the consciousness. So when in Buddhism we refer to the mind, what we're primarily referring to is consciousness, that which contemplates, evaluates, analyzes, and so on.
然后我们的心首先他去抓住一个东西不放他喜欢一件事情不放然后时间长了以后呢，这个心这种欲望发展了以后呢，然后最后就是影响到这个身体这个时候对这个东西上瘾了以后呢就不能没有这东西不仅仅是精神上不能没有这个东西，肉体上也就不能没有东西，它就发展到这种程度。但是开始的时候呢，跟肉体没有什么关系，这是一个内心的一个这个执着，然后这个执着发展到最后就上瘾就像吸毒酗酒这样子，最后就是肉体也就不能没有这个东西。
When we fixate onto something or some substance, we grasp it extremely strongly and won't let it go, then our desire for that particular object or substance increases and eventually has an impact on the body such that we develop a state of addiction and simply can't be without whatever the substance or object in question is. And so at that point, our attachment has developed to a point where it is both psychological and physical in its manifestation. So even though it might not have had a physical aspect to begin with, it began with a thought or a psychological kind of attachment. Along the way, it becomes implicated in our physical beings too. So becoming addicted to alcohol and drugs can happen in this way.
那我们现在我们的日常生活当中的这个各种各样的痛苦啊，80%啊，90%到85%，跟我们的这个精神啊有关系，也就是说是我们的精神啊导致的。
In our everyday lives, probably somewhere between 80 to 85 or perhaps a little bit more % of the suffering in our lives derives from our minds.
然后我们现在每一个人的这个工作压力还有就是这个生活压力各方面来自于各个方面的压力都很大然后呢，在这个时候这个我们的执着在这个当中就是起到了一个很关键的这个负面的作用。
These days, everyone has a great deal of pressure in their work lives, from really all aspects of their lives. The pressure is very considerable, and in the midst of all this, our attachment plays a very critical but negative role.
然后我们在日常生活当中确实我们发现了我们的这个痛苦的根源是我们的这个执着那么既然是这样子，我们应该要采取措施要解决这个问题如果不解决这个问题的话，那么我们的物质生活再丰富我们拥有的东西再多，实际上最终我们还是感觉不到幸福。
So, in our everyday lives, we discover then that the origin of our suffering is our attachment, is our clinging. Given this to be the case, it's necessary that we take measures to address this. If we are not able to do so, then regardless of how abundant our material lives become, it won't be possible for us to experience happiness.
比如说我们对某一个人特别在乎特别执着这样子的时候这个人的一举一动对于我们的影响非常的大非常大。如果他的任何一个言行举止没有跟着我想的去做这样子的话，那么我心里就立即就不开心甚至是这个痛苦这样子。
When we are extremely attached to a given person, we care about them very much, then even the slightest remark or action on their part that doesn't correspond with the way that we think things should go can carry the potential to make us very upset.
如果有一天我们开始不怎么在乎不怎么执着这个人这样子的时候，我自己的心里稍微放松了一点点这样子的时候呢，然后这个人的这个各种各样的行为就不会像以前这样子影响我们。
However, if we were able to lessen our sense of attachment to this person and loosen our mind somewhat, then regardless of what their behavior might be, it wouldn't have the capacity to impact on us in the same way that it would when we feel very attached to them.
那这样子以后呢，这些都是不仅仅是佛教里面讲而且我们的现实生活当中大家都体会到了大家都这个曾经体会经验有这样子的这个经验经历过那这样子以后呢这个就是不仅仅是一个佛教的一个概念，而是一个现实生活当中发生的一个实事。
So what I've just described isn't just a Buddhist notion. It's something that all of us have real and concrete experience of in our everyday lives.
那我们刚才讲的，我比如说这个苹果手机买的1周之内丢了，为什么痛苦呢？这个并不是说没有电话电话可能还有其他的电话但是不喜欢其他的东西，我就喜欢这个手机我就要执着所以它失去了然后我就不开心。另外一个不怎么在乎的这个手机丢了，可能是无所谓的。
So back to that Apple iPhone that we lose in the first week. The suffering, the unhappiness that comes from losing it isn't due to not having a mobile phone. We probably have a backup phone that we can use, but our suffering comes from the fact that we don't want that. We want the one that we lost, and it's for that reason that we feel unhappy.
然后为什么同样跟我有血缘关系的亲人离去了以后呢，那么为什么对我的这个打击不一样呢？因为对于一个人我特别的执着，特别在乎所以我很痛苦。那么另外一个人呢，同样也是我的亲人，但是呢他离开的时候呢，虽然是有痛苦，但是没有那么大，就是这个到外面去找什么原因是找不出来的，是我自己的这个执着的程度不一样所以最后给我带来的这个痛苦的程度也是不一样。
So it's the same when our relative dies. The relative that we are not so close to doesn't have such a great impact on us, whereas the one that we are close to, when they die, it has a great impact on us. The reason for this, if we attempt to locate it in the outside world, we won't find it. The reason is in our own minds. It is the different extent of attachment that we have to these different people.
这个道理我们稍微去思考一下去想一想就会明白的但是呢有些时候我们的想法因为我们的想法太简单了就没有去深入的去思考那这样子的话我们可能也许不太明白这个道理，也就是说不太明白这个道理的人也会存在的但是如果我们去思考一下，稍微去动一下脑筋那么我们立即就知道原来让我们特别痛苦的，让我们非常不开心的这些东西，它不在于外面，而在于我自己的内心当中。
So this principle is something that if we were to reflect on just a little bit, we would be able to understand very clearly. Often though it's the case that our approach to things is excessively simple, so there are likely to be people who in fact don't realize this. However, just by thinking and reflecting about it a little, it's possible to gain a very good understanding that what makes us unhappy in most circumstances doesn't reside outside of us, but resides in our own minds.
那我们生活在这个城市里面的人， 无论是东方西方，我觉得都差不多啊。内心有很多很多的不愉快的事情，有太多太多的压力啊。就像我们的生活当中啊，有丰富的这个物质啊，物质生活非常丰富。同样，我们的内心当中啊，也有很多很多的压力和很多不开心的事情。所以可以说，现代人当中啊，大多数人的这个精神的状态，真的是非常非常糟糕的，非常浮躁啊，非常痛苦啊，都不开心啊，就是这样子。
I'd say that these days, for people who live in big cities around the world, regardless of whether it's in the West or in Asia, that most people are really the same. There's a great pressure in their everyday lives. And so notwithstanding the fact that the material standard of living may be very good, at the level of one's mind, most contemporary people experience a great deal of restlessness, suffering, and unhappiness.
就像全球10大自杀圣地，也就是说，很多人去自杀的这个10个地方啊，其中除了几个以外啊，我都去过这些地方啊。
Of the 10 great suicide locations in the world, with the exception of a couple, I've visited most of them.
那么除了这个伦敦的地铁以外啊，都是非常非常漂亮的风景。
With the exception of the London Tube, the rest of the suicide locations are all very beautiful. Their scenery is very picturesque.
但是这么优美的风景啊，对这些自杀的人，因为他心里不开心了以后呢，然后这个环境不给他们带来任何的幸福、快乐啊，因为他内心很痛苦，所以这种人无论是在什么样的地方，他都不开心啊。所以就是说，我们的内心是非常重要啊。外面这个拥有的比如说我们生活的环境有多美多优美然后呢，我们的生活水平有多高这些都没有关系，只要我们的内心当中有问题了，那么这样子以后呢，任何一个东西都不能让我们开心幸福。
However, despite the fact that these locations are visually very beautiful, on account of the state of mind of the individuals contemplating suicide, the beauty is not able to give them any happiness at all. And so we can see from this that when we that beautiful surrounds are not able to bring us any happiness when we are in a particularly unhappy state of mind. So we can see then that our state of mind, our psychological state, is extremely important, regardless of how beautiful our living environment might be or how high our standard of living might be. If we have problems at the level of our minds, then none of these things are able to bring us any happiness.
现代社会就是因为各种各样的压力抑郁症的患者越来越多然后全世界的幸福指数越来越低那么都是因为跟我们自己的内心有关系外面的我们的生活大家都知道是越来越方便拥有的越来越多，但是我们的内心就是越来越没有幸福感。
So in modern society, with pressures left, right, and everywhere. The number of depression sufferers is constantly increasing. The happiness index is constantly decreasing. And we can see then that there is a very strong connection between this and our inner state of mind. So, notwithstanding the fact that our external situation is materially replete, our inner minds, as it were, are unhappy.
所以在这个时候呢，我们必须要去寻找一个解决我们的内心的问题的一个这样子的方法，这个非常重要。
So for this reason, it's extremely important that we locate a method for addressing the suffering at the level of our minds.
中国有一句话叫做"放得下，提得起"那我们怎么样做到提得起，放得下？
There's a saying in Chinese which translates roughly as being able to let something go and pick something up.
这样子以后呢，如果我们真的能够提得起，放得下，这样子的话，那我们的内心就是稍微轻松了我们从此以后就开始学习，学会放松这样子以后呢，我们有可能就可以过一个比较好的这个比较幸福的生活，至少。
So if we really were able to cultivate the ability to let things go when we need to let them go and pick things up when we need to pick them up and exist with a more relaxed state of mind, then it may very well be possible for us to live in a more happy way.
好，接下来给大家介绍一下怎么样去解决我们的这个执着简单的一个方法给大家介绍。
So I'd now like to introduce to everyone a method or an approach that we can use for overcoming our attachment.
执着这个执着我们可以说有两种这个方法，一个是彻底的断掉彻底的断掉另外一个呢就是放松执着还没有断掉但是没有抓得这么紧稍微放松一点点有两种方法有两个是我们可以去做的。
So there are essentially two approaches that we can take to attachment or clinging. The first is where we completely eliminate the attachment. And the second is where we don't completely eliminate it, but we become more relaxed in our grasp on the attachment. So we can say that there are these two approaches that we can take to in the face of fixation on particular things.
执着从我们的内心当中彻底的断掉这个需要时间需要时间，需要方法那么这个方法呢，我们明天会讲。今天给大家介绍一下我们怎么样学会放松还没有彻底的放下还没有彻底的放下这个执着，但是稍微放松一点，这样子的话，我们的生活不会这么紧张。
In order to completely eliminate our attachment, this is something that requires time, and it also requires using an appropriate method. This is something that I will talk about tomorrow evening, but tonight what I would like to speak about is loosening our attachment to things. So this is not completely eliminating our attachment, but loosening our attachment. And if we're able to do this, then it's possible for us to live in a way that is not so uptight and anxious.
这两个方法非常的简单 然后呢很实用啊，我们可以现学现用啊，不是现在学了以后下辈子才可以用啊，我们现学现用。
So this method is very simple, but it's also very practical. It's something that we can put immediately into practice. It's not something that we study now, but only have the opportunity to use in our next lives.
任何一个人在这个方法上啊，稍微投入一点啊，稍微下一点功夫，这样子的话，对每个人一定会有效果啊。而且这个效果啊，是我们自己每一个人能看得见、摸得着。
So this method is something that anyone, if they were to put some effort into it, would see results in. Every person with just a little bit of effort is sure to see results that are concrete and tangible.
我们要过一个比较应该不叫轻松啊，应该叫做幸福开心啊，这样子的生活的话，那我们一定要关照，一定要关心，一定要照顾啊我们的意识啊，一定要关心它的变化。
If we're going to live lives that are happy and joyful, then it's extremely important that we pay attention to and take care of our minds, and particularly the changes that take place in our minds.
到目前为止啊，我们很多的人就忽略了我们的意识啊，我们根本就没有去照顾它啊，没有去管啊它的这个趋向啊，它的发展的方向。
A lot of us up until this point have really neglected our minds. We've failed to take care of them and pay attention to their tendencies and their trajectories of development.
比如说我们有个孩子啊，然后呢我们没有想办法让他受到很好的教育啊，没有好好的这个培养啊，这样子以后呢，他最后就是学坏了啊，学坏了以后呢，然后啊他就做各种各样的这个非法的事情，然后呢就是受父母也就牵扯到很多的这些事情，然后受到这个他们的生活受到影响一样。我们只关心物质，然后就没有关照啊，没有去照顾我自己的心啊，照顾我的意识，这样子以后呢，最后他就逐渐的啊，他就学会了很多非常不好的东西啊，他就会变得越来越糟糕啊。然后他变得糟糕了以后呢，然后就在我们的生活当中啊，就起到了非常大的负面的作用，最后啊，我们就感觉不到这个幸福快乐啊，就是这样子。所以呢，我们要照顾自己的意识。
So it's the same as a child. Let's just say the parents are not able to let the child receive a good education, then ultimately what happens is the child goes down the wrong path, gets involved in a lot of illegal behavior, and this ends up impacting on the parents. It's the same with our minds as well. If we only take care to nourish our material existences but don't take care of our minds or our consciousnesses, then they will also develop along in a negative direction, and this will have all kinds of negative effects on our lives, with the outcome that we are simply not able to live happily.
然后我们今天讲的这个执着啊，我们今天没有要求大家这个彻底放下这个执着，我们只是说稍微放松一点不要执着不要抓得这么紧就是稍微放松一下。那么这个因为要求不高，所以我们今天在座的所有人都做得到，一定能做得到。而且 做到了以后呢，我们每一个人都感觉得到它的好处。
So what we're talking about tonight is not completely letting go of our attachment. We're just talking about loosening our grip on our attachments a little bit. This really isn't a high demand. It's something that everyone here is capable of doing, and therefore it's something that everyone here is capable of enjoying the benefits of.
佛教不是烧香拜佛的佛教当然我们可以到寺庙去烧香，当然可以或者是在自己家里佛堂里面烧香，当然是可以的。拜佛当然也是可以的然后我们参加各种各样的法会都可以的但是大家一定要知道，这些都不是佛教的终点这些都不是佛教的核心的思想。
Buddhism is not in its essence about praying and supplicating the Buddha. Of course, it's fine if people go to temples and make incense offerings or make offerings in their own homes. But doing these kinds of things, attending a lot of Dharma assemblies and the like, it's necessary that everyone realizes this is not the essence of the Buddha's teachings.
然后佛教的核心的思想就这么两个智和悲，慈悲心和智慧。
The core concepts of Buddhism, there are only two of them, and they can be summed up in the two words compassion and wisdom.
然后我们用这个智慧和慈悲来解决我们这一生当中的现实生活当中的所有问题完全是可以用佛教的这个智慧和这个慈悲来解决尤其是我们的内心当中的这些像痛苦呀、想不通不开心这些都完全很顺利、很成功的解决。
And it's possible to use wisdom and compassion to solve every problem that arises in our everyday lives, particularly psychological problems, problems at the level of our minds. All of these problems can be solved smoothly and successfully by relying on wisdom and compassion.
工作挣钱对我们每一个人来说是很重要因为我们要生存是非常的重要不能不工作，不能不赚钱但是学习修心就去这个修这样子的慈悲心和智慧呢，同样对我们每一个人来说同样也是很重要。
Of course, going to work and earning money is important for us all because we do need to survive. However, studying and practicing the Buddha's teachings is equally as important for everybody. Studying wisdom and practicing compassion, these are of equal importance.
然后我们工作所赚到的钱也就是金钱我们是用来解决现实的这个问题但是现实的问题呢，也不是全部都用金钱用物质来解决现实生活当中也有一部分是解决不了。那么这个我们需要用这个佛教的智慧和慈悲来解决。然后佛教的智慧和慈悲不仅仅是能够解决我们的现实生活当中的问题，而且它可以解决长远的问题。我们下一世再下一世这个生命轮回当中的这些很多问题都可以解决。所以这两个我们都需要
So the money that we earn from going to work is able to help us solve all kinds of problems in our real lives. We're able to address a number of issues through material means. However, there are of course some issues and some problems that can't be addressed through material means, and in respect of these issues we need the wisdom and compassion of the Buddhist teachings in order to solve them. And not only is Buddhist wisdom and compassion able to help us solve problems in this life, it's also able to help us address larger issues related to future lives and the entirety of cyclic existence. So we really need both of these things.
我们的工作和修心啊，这两个不会冲突的。然后我们的生活和这个修心也不会冲突，也不要冲突。我们有办法，这两个不冲突，我们要找到一个平衡点既可以修心也可以工作要找到一个这样子的路这个是有的，佛教里面是有这样子的路。
So we need to find a path that enables our working lives and our practice lives to not come into conflict with each other. And there is very much a way for us to live in, to bring both of these aspects of our lives into balance. Such a path does exist in the Buddhist tradition.
好，这样子以后呢，我们就是给大家介绍两个这个方法当中的其中一个就是我们要面对现实用现代人的话来讲，这个面对现实用佛教的话来讲我们要修要多思维无常无常就是一切事物的这个变化。
So what I'd like to talk about now is the first method that we can use to approach suffering, or attachment rather, and this is the method that we can use to loosen our sense of attachment to things. In normal language, this is a method that enables us to confront reality, or rather we might say this is a method of precisely confronting reality. In Buddhist terminology though, we would refer to this as contemplating impermanence, which means reflecting on the changing nature of reality.
无常它是自然的规律万事万物都在这个无常都在无常当中循环也就是说万事万物的这个规律就是无常在佛教里面是非常看重佛非常看重这一点为什么非常看重呢？因为我们普通人没有修心没有智慧的人我们就是我们的内心当中默认了这个世界是不变的比如说我们的亲人永远都不会离开的然后呢我们的物质永远我的财富永远都不会离开我的这种想法不是因为我们通过什么逻辑最后确定的，而是我们盲目的默认了这样子以后呢，突然间我们的亲人离开了或者是物质财富没有了等等，遇到这样子的问题的时候呢，然后因为我们没有任何的这个准备，这个时候我们的精神就会崩溃。
So the impermanence of phenomena is a natural law. It's something that every single phenomena is subject to, and it is regarded with great importance, impermanence that is, in the Buddhist teachings. Ordinary people, however, tend to tacitly regard most things as essentially unchanging. People tend to think that, tend to believe that their relatives won't depart them, that their wealth won't leave them, etc. Of course, this kind of belief doesn't come from any strong logic. It doesn't have a very strong logical foundation. It's something that's really been blindly accepted by people. And as a result, when in fact relatives do depart us, and when our wealth does leave us, without any preparation, our inner minds find themselves in a state of collapse.
佛教里面呢非常重视这个平常心这3个字，平常心。那平常心是什么呢？比如说我们的生活一帆风顺这样子的时候呢，我们有所准备当下再怎么样顺利再怎么样开心但是呢，这个当下的一帆风顺的这种情况它一定会发生变化的然后呢，当下的这一切都会发生变化因为他们都是食物，所有天下所有的食物他们都离不开这个变化那么有一天我们的亲人离开了或者是我们的财富没有了，那么这个也不是什么罕见的这个就是一个自然的规律。所以呢，当我们遇到这样子的问题的时候呢很淡定很淡定，那么这样子的就是一个这样子的很平静的心去面对这个就叫做平常心这个很重要的。
In Buddhism, we emphasize what is referred to in Chinese as 平常心, which probably translates as something like a calm and a calm mind and a mind that is possessed by equanimity. From moment to moment, there will be many ups and downs. All phenomena are subject to change. There is nothing in the world that can't escape change. And so things like our relatives and loved ones departing us and our wealth disappearing, etc., these in fact are not exceptions, but these follow the natural law of change. And so it's important for us moment to moment, regardless of the flux in circumstances around us, that we maintain minds that are calm and equanimous.
因为这个无常无常它有一个思维的模式通过这个思维的模式去思考这样子以后呢，我们就是从宇宙万事万物到我们身边的任何一个事情所有的东西都在变化，离不开跟这个离不开变化。那么这个我们反复的去思考了以后呢，然后我们想明白了想通了我们知道有一天这些东西都会离开我的有一天这些东西我都会失去的这个就是自然的规律这样子相通了以后呢然后有一天在我们的现实生活当中真正发生了这些事情的时候呢，然后这些事情不会给我们带来很大的打击创伤这个时候呢，我们能够很平静的很淡定然后就有一个这样子的平常的心去可以面对但是这个我们必须要还没有发生这样子的事情的时候就要做好准备就要把自己锻炼好 我们每一个人的生活当中一定会有很多很多的坎坷啊，我们每一个人都一定会衰老，我们谁都不想衰老，但是呢，一天一天的会衰老啊。然后我们最不喜欢面对的啊，连这个名字都不想提到啊，不想讲的，这个就是死亡啊。那么这个最后呢，它也会到来的啊。那这些都还没有来的时候那么这个时候呢，我们要做一些做一定的这个训练啊。这个训练就叫做修心，用佛教的话来讲，这叫做修心。这个修心是当我们面对这些坎坷的时候然后我们以一个非常强大的心去面对强大的心去面对外面发生了很多很多事情，但是这些事情不能影响到我的心就是把自己的心可以训练成这样子的这叫做修心。
So impermanence, contemplating impermanence or meditating or reflecting on impermanence refers to a way of thinking whereby we cast our minds to the changing nature of the universe from the greater sort of macro level to even the smallest things in our immediate lives. And by reflecting on this, we will really reach a comprehension that no phenomena can escape change. One day everything will depart us, one day we will lose everything. This is just the way the universe works. It's a natural law. And by thinking in this way and developing this understanding, then when major occurrences do take place in our lives, they won't cause us as great injury as if the injury that they cause us or the impact that they have on us will not be as great as if we had not meditated or contemplated impermanence, and we will be able to calmly confront the reality in our midst. However, what's really important is that prior to encountering these major events or mishaps, that we prepare in advance, that we do a necessary amount of training. Everybody will necessarily encounter ups and downs in life. Aging, for example, and of course that word that no one likes to hear. Death, that's something that will necessarily arrive for every single person. So it is important that beforehand, before we encounter these things, before they happen, that we do training. And this training we refer to in Buddhist terms as practice. And the result of this is that when we do encounter these serious events in life, that we will be able to confront them with a strong mind and therefore won't be impacted upon too negatively.
然后我们世俗的绝大多数的人就是我们平时都不去思考这些问题然后呢，平时我们思考的是什么呢？会不会我老的时候会不会生病呢？那个时候会不会没有人照顾呀？或者是我下一个月会不会怎么样啊？明年怎么样啊？等等这些我们有很多很多的担忧但是呢这个有心理学家有研究我们平时的很多很多的这个担忧当中70%都不会发生的是我们自己的多余的担忧但是像衰老、死亡生病以及比如说我们特别爱的这些亲人的这个离开这些呢100%都会发生的会发生的但是呢100%发生的这些事情呢，我们不做任何的准备然后只有这个30%的这个 发生率这样子的事情我们特别在乎，特别在意这就是我们的生活方式不对我们实际上就是说白了，我们不了解我们自己的生活和我们的人生导致的一些问题。
The majority of ordinary people, though, don't contemplate this. They don't contemplate these things. The things that most people do think about are things like, well, when I get old, will I become sick? Will there be no one to look after me? What will happen to me next month? What will happen to me next year? Worries of this nature. Psychological research, however, has proven that approximately 70% of our worries are not likely to manifest in reality. However, things like aging, becoming sick, dying, etc., were not simply ourselves, our own deaths, but the deaths of our close relatives, etc. These are things that will happen 100% for sure. And yet, despite the fact that they are bound to occur, we don't prepare for them in any way, but rather spend most of our time paying attention, worrying about things that only have a 30% probability of occurring. So this really points to the fact that our way of living, our way of living our lives is incorrect, and that we, in fact, don't understand our lives, and this lack of understanding causes all kinds of problems.
物质对我们的生活来说是非常重要，没有物质我们是没有办法生存。但是呢，比如说拥有比较丰富的物质生活，那么我们可以过一个稍微比较奢侈一点的生活，佛教也不会反对的这是因为你自己的劳动成果或者是你自己的这个福报然后呢，如果没有这个条件的话呢，那也可以过一个稍微比较简单一点的这个生活不一定每一个人都过一个同样的这个标准的这个生活那么更重要的是我们的精神上的一些东西这个精神空虚了以后呢精神浮躁了以后呢然后我们外面的拥有的再多根本就感觉不到幸福快乐，更何况佛教讲的解脱成佛。
Material things are very important. Without them, we are not able to survive. For people whose conditions are relatively better, it's possible for them to live lives that are on the more luxurious side. And Buddhism doesn't oppose this. People who have wealthy means, might be due to their hard work or perhaps due to their good fortune. Others might live lives that are, materially speaking, a bit more simple. Not everyone leads the same standard of material life, nor do they need to live the same standard. What is more important is our minds, our state of minds. When they become empty, when they become unhappy, then regardless of what our material state of living is, it's not possible for us to be happy, and it's not possible for us, more importantly, to achieve liberation or the goal of Buddhahood.
然后我们明明知道衰老、死亡、亲人的离开以及各种各样的这个痛苦都会存在，都会到来的，明明知道，但是不做任何的这个准备这是我们的最大的这个错误所以就是我们希望大家每一天哪怕是10分钟、20分钟这样子的时间也是可以的这么一个短暂的时间，我们都会能够挤得出来。这个时间这个时间是能挤得出来。那么这个时间当中呢，去思考一下，我们除了这个物质以外除了吃什么穿什么以外思考一下人生的 重大问题、长远的问题。这样子的话，那我们的这个生命人生一定可以做到有意义的这一点是不难要求不高这个很重要。
And yet we know very well that aging is going to take place. We know very well that we are going to get older, that we are going to die, etc. And yet we don't do mental preparations for this. And this is the greatest mistake that we make in our lives. And so I really hope that everyone is able to allocate 10 or 20 minutes each day. It's a very short period of time. I'm sure that everyone is able to extract that from their daily schedules to reflect on things aside from the material, so things aside from what we're eating, what we're wearing, and contemplate the ultimate important questions in life. This is not difficult to do, it's not a high demand, and yet it's extremely important.
然后这个思维的方式，我刚才说有一些模式那么这个模式化的这个思维这个我们今天呢一些具体的一些思维的方式，我们没有那么多时间但是给大家就推荐几个这方面的资料。
In terms of the ways or the methods of contemplation that we can use, there are very specific instructions as to how we can go about contemplating. But today, because we don't have enough time, I won't go into this in detail, but I will recommend some materials that everyone can consult for this.
第一就是宗喀巴大师的菩提道次第光论那么菩提道次第光论里面就是非常深入的就讲到这个思维的方式这个目前有这个中文版英文版也应该有的大家学习这是一个非常好的，这是第一。
So the first text that I would recommend is Lama Tsongkhapa's Graded Stages of the Path. This is available in Chinese version and English version, and this text contains a very detailed instructions on how to go about contemplating impermanence.
第二就叫做这个大圆满的前行普显上师言教。那么这本书呢同属异动非常容易理解这里面讲的也非常的透彻，非常的深入。
The second text that I would recommend is the introduction to the Dzogchen Preliminaries, The Words of My Perfect Teacher. This text is very accessible, it's very easy to understand, and it also contains detailed instructions.
还有藏传佛教的比如说噶举、萨迦等等其他的这些教派的这些当中也有同样的这个资料目前也有很多这个已经翻译了英文和这个中文这些里面内容都是一样的希望大家阅读学习然后就是修心。
And there are also texts, comparable texts in the Kagyu and in the Sadhya traditions too, that contain specific instructions on this practice. They've been translated into English and Chinese. The content is the same, and it is my hope that everyone reads and studies these texts and puts into practice the contents.
好，这个是我们今天讲的第一个方法，就是观这个修无常。
So that is the first method that we have spoken about this evening for addressing attachment, the contemplation of impermanence.
第 第二个方法呢，因为我们没有太多的时间啊，就简单的说一下，就是第二个方法是修慈悲心啊。慈悲心表面上看起来就是似乎我们在关心其他人啊，帮助其他人，但是呢，这个就叫做自利利他啊。我们利他的同时，就可以利益自己。也就是说，当我们开始关心这个他人利益他人的时候呢，实际上我们就开始利益自己了开始帮助自己了也就是说，当我们希望别人拥有幸福的这个生活为了这个付出这样子的时候呢，实际上实际意义上我们自己的幸福的生活就开始了所以这个慈悲心是非常非常重要。就这两个，一个是无常面对现实，另外一个是慈悲心关心别人，就这两个就可以把我们的这个痛苦的来源就可以放松，还不是完全彻底的解决，但可以放松今天给大家提供的或者是推荐的两个方法解决我们的这个执着的两个方法，就是这两个，一个是修无常一个是修慈悲心，就这两个。
So the second method that we can use to lessen the grip of our attachment is the cultivation of compassion. And because tonight we don't have enough time, I won't go into it in much detail. But what I would like to say is that when we cultivate compassion, when we exercise compassion to others, on the surface, it appears that we are helping others, helping them to be happy. But in actual fact, this amounts to what we refer to in Buddhism as helping or benefiting self and benefiting others. And what this means is that when we actually go about helping others, when we work for the happiness of others, then in fact we also begin to work for the happiness of our own selves. And so these two together, the contemplation of impermanence and the practice of compassion, are both methods that we can use to address the origin of our suffering. Obviously not to completely eliminate the suffering, but to relax our suffering. So these are the two methods that I wanted to raise this evening, cultivate the contemplation of impermanence and the practice of compassion.
然后这个慈悲心的具体的训练的方法，具体的修法，除了我们刚刚推荐的两个这个资料以外这两个资料里面也有讲得很清楚的除了这两个以外，还有希望大家这个学习入菩萨心论也就是入心论这个目前有中文的，有这个英文的，然后呢有很多很多的注解解释，都很多资料都已经非常非常丰富希望大家阅读学习这样子以后呢，我们可以学会这个修慈悲心的方法。
In terms of the practice of compassion, aside from the two texts that I recommended just before, both of which contain very clear instructions in relation to compassion practice, the other main text that I would like to recommend is The Way of a Bodhisattva. This is available in English and in Chinese. It has very clear instructions, and not only that, there's a great deal of commentaries and other literature that explains this text. And so it is my hope that everyone read this text and also practice its instructions.
好，今天的我们的课就讲到这里，到此为止。
So that brings to a conclusion our teaching for this evening.
最后我们大家做个回向。
And we are going to end the teaching by dedicating the merit.
Sonum de ye danjo zubanya done ni be dana ba je je ga nan je wa long zhe ba zhe bin zo lin zhuo a zhuo er xiu o me a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma se de hong o me a